Hi everyone, it's Hillary with the Garden Family, and it's January 13th and we are down in our seed starting room because what are we planting today?
Today we're starting onion seed, and I think you said you had a whole bunch of questions you were going to ask while we start the seeds. So hopefully by the end of this video you will learn everything you need to know to grow big, beautiful onions like these.
So I wrote down a lot of questions that I thought beginner gardeners, maybe even intermediate gardeners might ask people about growing onions. And the first one is, isn't it a little early to start onions? It's January.
Actually, no, they're by far the earliest seed that we start. So we are in zone 6B, Southwest Ohio. Our last frost is usually end of April, sometimes even early May. And we are starting our onions now, mid-January. So generally you want to start them about 2 months before you plant them out. And you usually want to plant them out about 6 weeks before your last frost.
Before. Oh.
Yeah, so if you think our last frost is end of April, lots of times we get our onions out around mid-March. In fact, last year we got them out
early,
even early March, because we had such
warm
an early
weather.
spring.
All right, question number 2. Yes, I've seen pre-started onions at the store. Why would you go to the trouble of planting them from seed when you could just buy them at the store and save yourself time, energy?
That's a good question. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with getting them at the store. Onions, you can either get them as sort of small little bulbs or small plants. I think the bulbs are called sets. Or you can get transplants that just look like little onions. Or you can start them from seed, which is what we're doing. We've just found a lot better results starting them from seed. And part of it is just the life of an onion plant. They are biennial, so they generally live 2 years. First year, their job is grow an onion. And the second year is to grow flowers and seeds. And when you sort of interrupt their life to package them up and send them to stores to buy, we found a lot of them will bolt or go to seed prematurely, and then they're not really useful for eating, which is what we want.
Okay, so we have to start our onions from seed. Can you walk us through that?
For sure.
Okay.
If you want to get your phone, you can record up close, and then they can kind of see.
There you go.
First thing, a little atypical. We start most of our seeds in these to-go containers. You can see I've reused these. They're still a little dirty. And what's nice about them is they come with this little lid, and it acts like a humidity dome that will allow us to keep the soil moist while it's germinating. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a little bit of seed starting mix. So we're just going to put some of that in here. Now we just need to get our seeds. Let's do this new variety. We have Rasa de Milano. It's a red or purple onion. Looks kind of interesting. We'll go ahead and open these up. This is what the seeds look like. And in this case, you don't really need to be all that exact. We're gonna just put a whole bunch of seeds. We're gonna do what's called broadcast seeding, where I'm just gonna put a whole bunch of seeds in here. One thing that's great about onions is they don't mind their roots being disturbed. They have pretty shallow roots. So you can broadcast seed them and then just prick them out and put them into containers later on, and I'll show you that in a little bit. I'm just gonna firm these down. I guess I shouldn't have closed over this soil, because I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit right on top there.
How long will it take for those to germinate?
Generally it takes about a week or so for these to germinate. I'll put a video up of what these looked like 1 week later from last year. After we've put those in, I'm just going to water over the top, and then I'm going to put that humidity dome back on. So last step, just to water these in. You want them to be damp, but not overly saturated.
And what about a heat mat? Do those go on one of our heat mats?
No, so obviously a lot of seeds do. Usually those are the warm weather plants like tomatoes and peppers. Onions like cool weather, and so they generally germinate best about 70, 75 degrees.
Oh.
So in this case, usually about 70 degrees down here in our basement seed starting room. So these, we just need a label on them so we know what they are. And then I'll just leave them on the table right here in order to germinate.
Great. So if I have older seeds from last year or the year before, do you think I could use them, or?
1 year probably, but one thing about onion seeds is they have one of the shortest shelf lives of any seeds. A lot of seeds you can keep 5, 10 years and they'll be fine. Onion seeds usually, once they're about 2 years old, their germination rate goes down considerably. And these are newer seeds. Some of them are a year old. I think maybe this tray is slightly less germination. And then I have one that were 2 years old, and I thought, well, I might as well just use all of the onions. I might get a couple. Here it is. One Walla Walla onion plant. If you have onion seeds from last year, I'd probably just use them. One of the nice things about doing that broadcast seeding method is you just put a whole bunch of seeds in there, and then you just pick out the ones that actually germinate. And so you're not wasting little trays where seeds that aren't germinating.
Speaking of seeds, I know we have to pick seeds based on where we live. Tell me about, is it your growing climate, or what does it have to do with?
Great question. Actually, one of the more confusing things about onions. Onions use day length to decide when they're going to bulb. And so if you think about it, in the Northern Hemisphere, let's just talk about the United States, although I know we have some viewers outside the United States. We're in the Northern Hemisphere, so southern states are closer to the equator, and their summer days really aren't all that long. We're 2/3 of the way up. We get just about 15 hours of daylight around summer solstice, and of course there's more northern states than us. So they break down seeds into either short day, intermediate day, or long day, and they're basically bred to start making a bulb based on that longest day. So if you live in the South, generally you're growing short day onions. We're kind of at the cusp of intermediate and long day, so we can kind of get away with both. So the real question is, what would happen if you grew the wrong kind?
Yeah.
So if, let's say you lived in Alabama and you grew a long day onion, what would happen is you'd have an onion plant and it would never get triggered to make a bulb because the day would never get long enough. So you'd just grow this plant and then you'd pick them up and it wouldn't really have an onion at all, or it'd be super, super small. What if you were in Minnesota and you grew a short day onion? So what would happen there is, just after the spring equinox,
it would probably,
right around when the daylight's around 12 hours, it'll start bulbing. But I mean, the ground probably just stopped being frozen there, so it just didn't have long enough of a growing season to make a big onion at that point. And so you'd get, again, the wrong onion. So the point is, you have to pick the right kind. Generally, when you look at the seeds, it'll say what latitude is correct for your onions.
Very cool. That is a fun fact. Yeah. Okay, so once they germinate in your little to-go container, what do you do next?
So, like I said, and I'll put up some footage, but you'll have a lot of little onions here. As soon as they germinate, we're going to take this humidity dome off. And usually for about 2 weeks, I'll just let them grow in here. And then you're going to prick them out. Basically, take each individual onion plant and then plant them into a bigger container. Last year, I actually tried something new and I put them all in a open 1020 tray with drainage holes. They grew really well, but it was a little bit annoying when I went to plant them. I had to individually sort of detangle all of their roots. So this year I'm going to go back to what I've done in the past and just plant each one in one of these 72 cell trays. That way I can take each onion out.
Seems good, yeah. Okay, so what about water and fertilizing onions?
Yeah, kind of two ways to think of it. One's inside, one's outside. So inside, generally we use just a water-soluble fertilizer. I really don't mind inorganic fertilizers indoors. They're less stinky. We try this. This is an organic fertilizer, but it has a pretty pungent smell. So the way I water onions and fertilize onions, the same as I water pretty much all the other seeds. I make a very dilute fertilizer. So if you're going to use something like Miracle Grow, it's a half teaspoon in 3 gallons.
Oh, it's
and so very dilute.
diluted.
But then I don't I don't fertilize every 1 to 2 weeks. I just fertilize every time I water it.
Right.
And so they're going to grow for about 2 weeks in here. We're going to prick them out, and then we have about 6 weeks of growing under our grow lights. Grow lights are on for about 16 hours a day. And then once they're outside, onions need a lot of nitrogen. And so they're using something like blood meal. In-ground beds, it's nicer to use organic fertilizers to kind of build that soil ecosystem, but they do need pretty high nitrogen, so blood meal is a good option for organic gardening.
I can never remember, but when do we harvest the onions?
It's going to be somewhere just past summer solstice, right?
So early.
We grow the intermediate day onions. Those ones really start bulbing sooner, right? Because they hit that day length cutoff beforehand. And so we harvest those usually early July. And then our long day onions, we grew Patterson last year.
Right.
Those we're harvesting really kind of late July. So actually I think these are our Patterson onions. You can see right here, nice dry paper. These are 6 months old. So we've had these in our storage for 6 months and they're doing great.
They're fantastic.
Yeah.
So how do we know when the onions are ready to be harvested?
That's a good question. Usually what you'll see is you've got the onion there. Lots of times the bulb as it grows will sort of pop up from the ground, so you'll be able to see it. And then it's going to have the greens there.
Yep.
And what you'll find is the onion greens just sort of flop over.
I remember.
They're all kind of laying on their side. That's because right here at the stem, we've started to basically pull all of that energy down into the bulb. And that's usually when you harvest. You can harvest fresh onions sooner. So let's say you're just making something and you want an onion.
Yeah.
You can harvest it before that time, but it won't store very well.
Okay. So another question, how do we prepare our onions for long-term storage?
So the first thing would be to harvest them at the right time, like we said, necks flopping over. We're going to harvest them all, and instead of bringing them indoors right away, you have to let them dry out. You really want this sort of, you can hear it, kind of crunchy paper to protect the onion inside. So what we do, we have a sort of an outbuilding barn, and we bring all of the onions in there. And then we've got these wire racks. We store the onions upside down, and it's pretty hot at that time because it's late July, but you want them out of the sun. And then we put a fan on them 24 hours a day for about 2 weeks. You can check on them. Generally about 2 weeks later, they should be pretty dry. If they're not totally dry at that point, just give them a little bit more time. After that, you want to bring them inside and keep them kind of in a cool, well-ventilated area. We've got an area kind of down, it's sort of like a cellar, and that's where we store ours.
So once you've pulled the onions out, will you plant anything else in the bed? Succession plant another crop?
Yeah, usually that's a good idea because it's late July at that point. So you could do a really short summer plant like a summer squash or a green bean would be another good option. And then the other thing you could do is some sort of cover crop, like a buckwheat cover crop. And then the last thing would be to put your brassicas in there. Usually that's right around the time when you're ready to plant broccoli or cauliflower, at least for us here in Zone 6B. And that's what we did last year. And we got some great broccoli that came after our onion harvest.
Well, that does it for my questions about growing onions. So anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's about it. I'm sure, hopefully that answered most of your questions. But if there are questions we didn't answer, leave them in the comments. We're happy to answer them for you. It's pretty exciting that we're starting gardening even though it's snowy
The
outside.
doldrums of winter.
But starting onions is sort of the kickoff to the 2025 season. So again, any questions you have, leave them in the comments. If you like this type of content, want to see how our onions do, go ahead and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you at the next video.